But you've built such an awesome like company and everything like that. Like, where did you transition from? I'm going to be a trapper to, you know what? I'm going to start writing. I'm going to start being a conservationist. I'm going to go and I'm going to start a company called MeatEater and make people more aware of hunting and fishing and the right way to go about these things. Like, when did that big transition happen for you?
So I started trapping muskrats when I was 10 and was just like consumed by it. One of the reasons I liked it, well, it was kind of, there's these two things that would work together on it. Like I liked doing it, but I was also very interested in, remember we were talking about Daniel Boone?
Mm-hmm.
I was very interested in these guys that we now call long hunters, like the early deer skin hunters, and very interested in mountain men and these other groups of guys that would go out and just supply the skin trade, like fur trappers and hunters and shit. I was just fascinated by that stuff. Part of why I was fascinated by it is because I liked to do it too. And these were these iconic American figures who made their livings doing that and had all these wild ass adventures, right? So when I was little, I wanted to make my living doing like as a hunter and trapper. The only contemporary version of that would have been being a sort of like generalist trapper, who traps for fur and whatever else when they're growing up, or getting older. And it just became untenable. At the same time, it became untenable because the economics didn't work out, because there's a market that like really fluctuates wildly. I got interested in writing. And for a while I thought, well, what I'll do is I thought I could supplement my income from trapping as writing articles about trapping. Went to college as an afterthought. Like, I don't really know. What's the test you're supposed to take when you, like, what the ACTs? Is that what you take?
Yeah, SAT and ACT.
People tell me there's no way this is true. I know I went down and took the ASVAB. I took the military test and thought about going in the Army for a minute, changed my mind. I don't think I took the college test. Like, I honest to God don't think it. I remember going down to the community college. Where I grew up was in Muskegon County, Michigan. I went down to the community college and I wrote a check for $600 for a semester in night classes. And I began college like reluctantly.
Really?
Yep.
Reluctantly.
Dude. And kind of fell in love with it. But I took 2 years of night classes and just kind of started getting into school and like getting more into writing. And then pretty soon I was very focused and dedicated on like becoming a writer. Whenever I give professional advice, I always point this out. Like when I give professional advice now to people, I always tell them, like, if I'm talking to kids or whatever, I tell them like, never have a plan B. You guys probably know what I'm talking about because you made it in a thing that was impossible to make it into. Like, it's impossible to be in the NFL, right?
Right.
So it's like, kill any plan B because it'll be more seductive, it'll be easy, and you'll do plan B. If the plan B is sitting there, it'll be, the draw is too strong. Like you'll be sucked into your plan B.
When adversity strikes, you'll look back at that plan B and be like, it would be easier just to do that.
I could just pivot to this lane.
Yeah.
Yep. And so even though my plan A was like to be a trapper, my plan B was to be a writer. Once I settled on that idea, kind of like the sort of an adult notion of what to do is like to be a writer, I was either going to do that or I was going to die. You know what I mean? Like there was no other option. Like I never entertained other options about it.
Outside of writing?
Yeah. I was like, I was going to make it work as a writer. And for years, it's hard for years, right? Like it's hard to get there financially, but if you're not married, if you don't have kids and you're not married, like it doesn't, like there's no such, you're not like actually poverty, you're just broke, right? You're just broke. So you have years of being broke as a writer, but I eventually got there and just by being that's what I was going to do,
What was the one thing that started to catch traction in the writing world, that started to shift? Like, okay, now I can start supplement money, making a little bit more money. Like, when did that momentum start in writing?
Yeah, there's a meritocracy to it. right? There's absolutely a meritocracy to it, but there's also like a connections thing. I got lucky. There's this writer. He used to be a very prolific writer. There's this writer named Ian Fraser. He wrote this phenomenal book about the American Great Plains called Great Plains, where he just spent years cruising around on the Great Plains. He's really good about culture writing, really good about like writing about landscape and American West and Western history. He had this book, so he wrote this book, Great Plains, and I love this book. It wound up being the weirdest deal where like he had never gone hunting. And he'd written whole books on like the Lakota Sioux and all this Western stuff, but hadn't hunted for some reason. And I got a chance to take him on his first deer hunt. And I took him on a canoe trip for deer. He gets a deer. And meanwhile, we talk a lot about writing, and he takes some of my stuff and takes a piece I wrote and sends it to Outside Magazine. And this is in the very late 90s, 99, the piece published in 2000. And I had written a piece about, that we used to go to the bar. When the bar closed, we would go out and sleep inside this dam and then fish, whitefish and steelhead inside the dam at daybreak, And I wrote this whole story about doing this. And he gives it to his editor at Outside Magazine, and they bought it for $4,000, which I thought, dude, when I went, there's this, like, I was living in Missoula, Montana. When I got that $4,000, I remember I bought a topper for my truck, which is like $800, and went out to Hot Springs, Montana, and basically just holed up at Hot Springs, Montana, in a like room for a couple of days to try to just process the windfall.
Yeah.
The amount of wealth. The
amount of money.
Yeah. Man, $3,200 after that.
I know. It's like I got a topper.
Cash.
I got a topper. I'm going to blow a couple more $100 here at the Hot Springs Hotel. Now, what's my path forward? And that was it. It was just like, I remember that dude telling me in the writing world, and it's changed so much. It's like, this is an old ass story, right? This is the year 2000. But him saying, like, he said, like, as a writer, he goes, somehow you just wind up with like a stamp of approval on your head. And he goes, I don't understand it, but all of a sudden you get it and you got it. You get like the stamp of approval.
Yeah.
And so in those days, there's 100 ways to do it, but in those days, there were certain magazines that once you would publish in those magazines, it was like your stamp of approval. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden people would, like, you could sell a book, right? It's just like all of a sudden the whole world opened up to you. All of a sudden, TV people call either about development, maybe they want to license something you wrote or get an option on shit you wrote. I don't know. It's just all of a sudden, like, you struggle. Then all of a sudden, like, some imperceptible thing happens, and all of a sudden just life becomes easy.
Yeah.
And he told me that would happen, And, or he told me you need to get the stamp of approval. You'll know it when you got it.
Yeah.
It was true, man.
Yeah, Outsider Magazine was a stamp, huh?
Yeah,
that was it. That set you off for the next thing.
And I wound up being on the masthead at Outside. I wrote a lot of articles for Outside. And I wrote all over the place. I did magazine bits everywhere. I did I wrote tons of magazines, and then I started doing books. Mm-hmm. And then from books got into doing television. Television kind of got into doing podcasts, and then.
Were you excited about television? Because you're talking about, plan A was trapper, plan B was writer, then writer becomes plan A. When TV starts to come into the equation, that's like another opportunity, getting in front of the camera.
No, not in and of itself at all. I felt like I felt TV was a way to, kind of round everything out with books. Like, I thought it would be a way to find audience and find readers, mm-hmm. Like the primary, like at any point in time, if at any point in time someone came to me and said, hey, you gotta choose, like, you can TV host, or you can write, like, at any time, I would never, without a doubt, I'd always go toward writing. Always. Yeah. Always. If I ever had to make the decision, but I always just looked at it like part of a thing. You know what I said, that or I always looked at it as like part of being a writer was doing that kind of stuff. Remember I said the industry changes so much over time. And being back in, like when I was starting out, that magazines were a good way to come in. There's 100 ways to come in. I mean, you guys are like media professionals, like you fucking came out of athletics, right? Like that, I wasn't aware of that path to media. And it's everything changes so much. Like you couldn't do it the way I did it anymore. But what became obvious to me over time is that you had to learn, you had to think of like your world as a set of ideas, right? Like it's and this set of ideas lives, and it's this thing, and you can hold this set of ideas, and like imagine that there's all these sort of conveyor belts moving away from you. Do you know what I mean? And you could have this thing in your hand, it's your set of ideas, and you can just randomly place them on these conveyor belts that move away from you. When I started out, it was like there was only one, and it was writing for publication, you know? And so every idea was placed on that thing, on that one belt, right? But now I imagine that it's this array of belts, and it's like, it's podcast material, it's television stuff. You know, I've worked on some documentary stuff, right? And it's, instead of thinking that I'm doing all these different things, I'm still dealing with this contained object, which is my ideas, like the things I care about, and where I put them isn't important to me, right? It's just important to me that it's like, this remains like my fucking thing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I don't really care about all that shit. That's kind of how I've come to think about it.
It's the necessary evil to get your idea, this contained thing, out to more masses, so they can enjoy and understand it more. Yeah,
exactly. And I went to kind of like, at the time I got into a pretty, like a prestigious writing program at University of Montana. And at that time, man, there was like, with the internet coming, people were deathly afraid of the internet, man. People were deathly afraid of, like, everybody thought that like, that you were this, that like writing books was the intellectual purity, and everything else was less than, you know, and everyone was real, you know, you could get real snobbish about all that stuff, but
You never fell in that trap?
Well, I did, but I fell out of it.
I could see it. I could see it. The internet coming, be like, these individuals don't understand the art of pen to paper.
Exactly.
And the cursive writing.
These Philistines.